Welcome back to Missing. I am Tim here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic today, Tim. It is the first day of the new year, 2025. I hope everyone out there had a happy and safe New Year's Eve, and I hope everybody, including you, Tim, I hope everyone is approaching this new year with a fresh set of optimism. And Tim, I would like to know how you're doing on this brand new day of 2025.
I'm doing all right here today, Lance. Thanks for asking. Excited to have finally ushered out 2024 with a nice kick in the behind, and here we are in 2025. Definitely excited about turning the page here. And Lance, this interview that we have is very much a classic Missing episode in that we're speaking with a family member of a victim who was missing, but is now not missing. She is now a murder victim. This is the story of Trish Haynes. And in this episode, we speak with Trish's great aunt, Valorie Haynes Alvarez. And Valerie tells us all about this case, and it's a very disturbing timeline and storyline. It's unfathomably tragic and dark, and some parts of it are just downright evil, Lance.
Yeah, I hear you. It's, like you said, a classic episode. It's one of those Missing episodes that we will say this is why we do this show, because this family member really needs to get her voice heard by as many people as possible. This tragedy that surrounds her, the family, especially Trish, who was tragically murdered and experienced what seems to be a period of time and a level of abuse that is, I mean, you said the word evil. I mean, it's monstrous. If this is all true, what transpired in her life in the final moments, and disturbing, and unfortunately very textbook in the way everything broke down, with reports of being abused or missing person reports, or how law enforcement handled things. I mean, it's very similar to a lot of the other missing person and other cold cases that we look at, where in retrospect, I guess it's easy to look back on something and say, hey, why wasn't this done sooner? Or why didn't somebody listen to this person or believe them, and now look at the result? But that's just, unfortunately, all too often the case, and it's no exception here.
Yeah, and Trish Haynes was 25 years old at the time of her death. She did go missing from Grafton, New Hampshire, and parts of her were found in Grant's Pond in Grafton, New Hampshire. About a year later, in September of 2018. We were introduced to Valerie by Lou of Private Investigations for the Missing, who is, a part of the nonprofit that we're on the board of. Also, just want to mention the Light the Way organization. You can go to lightthewaymissing.com, and they advocate for this case, and there's some information on their site about Trish's case. So make sure to check out those organizations. There are links in the show notes.
And if anybody does have information on Trish Haynes, they are instructed to contact the Attorney General's office in Concord, New Hampshire, 603-271-3671. You can contact the state police as well in Concord, New Hampshire, 603-271-2520. And I don't know if you've said this, Tim, but they use the hashtag Justice for Trish Haynes. So if you are posting about this, use that hashtag and support the family in any way you can. And stay tuned for the end of this episode, where Tim and I are going to give our final thoughts on this. And we do have some very final thoughts on this after listening to it back and processing it. So why don't you all listen to it, and then hopefully what you're thinking and your questions that you have, hopefully we'll address that in our final thoughts.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break here, and make sure to follow us on social media at Missing CSM, and we're going to be right back with Valorie Haynes Alvarez.
It's great to have you on the show, and we really appreciate you taking the time to come on and inform the listeners about this tragic event that's happened in your family, and doing our best to keep the spotlight really bright on this. But before we get to that, can you just let the listeners know who you are and maybe a little bit about yourself and what brings you to the show?
Yes. My name's Valorie Haynes Alvarez. I am the great aunt of Trish Haynes, who has been missing and we know was murdered in 2018 in Grafton, New Hampshire. We have been waiting for the state of New Hampshire to bring charges against the people that it's very commonly known that where she was last seen, where she was reportedly abused for a few months. And it's time that the state step up and take care of what they should have been taken care of 6 years ago, because they have all the facts of the case and they just have not brought it to the front and charged the people that should have been charged.
Okay, and definitely want to ask you about all of that. But before we do, can you tell us a little bit about Trish? What was Trish like?
I was there the day she was born. Saw her shortly after birth. She was an adorable child. I stayed in her life quite a bit. They lived in Florida, and I lived in Florida at the time. And I used to take Trish whenever I could. I took her shopping. I took her to carnivals. And, she was my great niece, but she was almost like a granddaughter to me in a sense. She was not my granddaughter. She was my great niece. But she was an adorable child, and I just enjoyed being with her. I didn't have any grandchildren of my own at the time. And so I would just take her, and she'd come and stay with me at different times during the when she was close. I didn't always have access to her because when she was 3 or 4, they moved from Florida to North Carolina. And I didn't see her as often, but she at different times came and visited me in New Hampshire, and I totally enjoyed her. She was a bright little star as far as I was concerned. She was very fashion-minded. She was one of these children that would change their clothes about 10 times a day just because I think she should have been a model. Very kind-hearted, very always searching for love, and most of the time she searched for love in all the wrong places, as the song says. And she ended up with a couple of guys that she never should have ended up with. And it's because of a breakup with one of these guys that she ended up being in New Hampshire. There had been an abuse charge that she filed against him. And then she recanted the story because he would have had to go back to prison because he'd been in there before. So he got her to recant the story about the abuse, which she did, and the police in North Woodstock, New Hampshire, begged her not to because it meant that she would have to face charges for filing a false police report. So that's what happened to her. That's why she was in New Hampshire, and she didn't really have a place to stay, so she looked up this couple, Ashley Smith and her husband Douglas, and went there and stayed with them. And that was the last we ever saw her.
And if you don't mind, I just want to go back to your description of Trish. And you said she was very fashion-minded.
And I was imagining this was when she was a younger person, but did that carry over into her adult years? I know she was only 26 when this happened. So did she have a period of time where, this was a career that she wanted to pursue?
No, she did not pursue it. She, as a matter of fact, she had, because of some trauma in her life as a young person, she actually had some PTSD, and for which they put her on medication. And with this medication, she just never really pursued anything. She did have jobs. She worked, when she was in New Hampshire, she worked at the mountain club at Loon as a housekeeper and so forth. She had waitress jobs, but she did not pursue a career of any particular trade.
Well, it was such a short period of time. I mean, again, she's 26 years old. I don't know that many 26-year-olds who have it exactly in their head what they're going to do. Most of them are trying different vocations. So I was just curious about the fashion thing because you gave such a colorful description of it.
I wish things had lasted long enough so she could have pursued something. She also had a real interest in animals. She loved animals, and I think she did it one time just shortly before she disappeared. She had talked to me and said, I'd like to go to veterinarian school, or at least work with animals some way too. So she had a soft spot for them.
Now, you said that she contacted Ashley and Douglas Smith because she needed a place to live. Did she know them before?
She knew Ashley as a child. For one period of time, when she was 12, her grandparents, who raised her, moved to Warner, New Hampshire. When she was at that school, there was a classmate who was 12 years old at the time, too. Her name was Ashley. She wasn't Ashley Smith then. She was one of these children that when Sandy, the grandmother, met Ashley, she immediately told Trish she did not want her hanging around with her anymore. She was not a child that came from a very good family, and she was very like a bully. She was a bully to Trish then, and Sandy said, you don't need a friend that's going to be a bully to you. So they stopped that association. Well, then we fast forward from the time she was 12, and then she was like 24, 25, and she reconnected with this Ashley. Ashley's name was Ashley Ruff before she married Douglas Smith. So she had looked up Ashley and had seen her on Facebook. And so who would know that a 25-year-old woman with 4 or 5 kids would still be the same bully that she was when she was 12 years old. So Trish found her on Facebook. When Trish ended up having to be up there because of this court date in order to answer the filing of the false police report, they were taking her to court for that. So she had to go up to New Hampshire to do this court case. And it's because she was up there in the wintertime. I wasn't around. She had no other place to stay. And so she looked up Ashley. And Ashley invited her over there to stay with them, which she went up there. And after that, we only heard a couple of phone calls from her. And then there was a succession of lies told to us. Even after she was missing, Ashley was still lying about her having run off with a boy, and none of that was founded. Trish had disappeared from Ashley's home.
I've read an article where Ashley Smith is quoted by saying, she stayed with me, she didn't live with me, but we are best friends. So obviously we spent some time together, but you're describing this as though they're not best friends.
Well, they may have. Ashley was lying. Ashley will spin a story however she wants it to. And this is after she had said that Trish was still with a friend, but they had already pulled the parts of Trish's body out of that pond. So she was covering for herself. She was, not being truthful about where Trish was for weeks and months. And that was not true. And they may have been friends the day that Trish went there, but then we've had different reports of different people who actually witnessed the abuse that Trish went through at that house. There was a 10-year-old girl that would go to visit that house, and she related to us many of the atrocities that she had seen happen to Trish. And she was 10 years old, but that little girl is now 17, and she's telling the same stories. She took us into that house where that we could see. She showed us different areas of the house that where she saw Trish being abused. So that was where we got our information, and that little girl is still telling the same story at the age of 17.
Wow. So what happened when you first found out Trish was missing?
It was really kind of difficult because we were waiting. Sandy, the grandmother, here in Florida. Trish left Florida to go back and answer those charges in, I think it was December 16th. And so then we were not really worried too much because she was supposed to go to court the beginning of January. Then the beginning of January came, and Sandy got a message that Trish's court case had been postponed and would not be coming due until April. So the story was that, Trish was staying with her friend Ashley, and that she was going to go to court and wait up there until April to do this court case. So we were not worried, and Sandy didn't hear from Trish very much because the story was Ashley lived on a mountain, the cell service was bad, and so whenever they got a chance to call, it was when they went into town. And Ashley was always there with Trish when these calls came through, and there were not very many of them. So then it came to be, Sandy says, well, I'd ask her, have you seen or have you heard from Trish? And she says, no, because she can't call very often. And not only that, supposedly Trish lost her cell phone. Now, Trish without a cell phone is a fish without water because Trish lived on her cell phone. So she lost that supposedly in January. And because she lived on a disability income, we knew that in February, if she had lost her phone in January, that she should be getting a new phone in February when she got her money. And we just still never got any calls from her. So we still were dependent on Ashley with whatever she wanted to feed us as to what Trish was doing. So it came to be February, and there was still no calls from Trish. So I started getting a little bit concerned, but then we said, you know what, we're going to give it until April. She's supposed to go to court in April, and as soon as she goes to court, she might have to spend 7 days in jail for, filing a false police report, but she'll contact her grandmother and come back to Florida in the middle of April. So the middle of April came, and we gave it time for the 7-day court sentence, if that was what had happened. And then we started expecting that she was going to call and say she's coming back to Florida. The call never came. And so we started getting a little nervous and wondering. And then so we called Ashley, and then she said, well, she ran off. Ashley gave us the story that Trish had found a new boyfriend, and she'd run off with this boyfriend, and she hadn't seen her. And we're thinking, that doesn't sound right. And it also does not sound like Trish not to be in contact with her grandmother. So I started getting a little nervous then. So this is the end of April. May, I went back to New Hampshire. I always, I'm in Florida for the winter. So around May 15th, I went back to New Hampshire. And I said, I'm going to start looking for Trish and find out. And I told Sandy, I said, perhaps we should file a missing person report. Well, then the story came that when I got back to New Hampshire, I called the courthouses and the jails to find out if they, what happened to Trish, what did they know. The first thing I found out that Trish never appeared for her court hearing. So with not having gone to the court hearing, now is she really hiding out? And because she could be arrested for not having appeared in court, is she hiding? Did she run away with a new guy? And so we did not know what to do. So I kept saying to Sandy, we should file a police report. And she says, no, let's wait. She says, because if she didn't go to court on purpose, then she's going to have more of a sentence. So we waited. So then I told Sandy, I said, come July, because that was in June. I said, in July, if she does not come forward and ask for her Social Security check, because they stopped payment on it. That's what I told Sandy. I said, tell the government to stop payment on her Social Security check, because she will have to come out and look for her Social Security check. That's her only means of support. and then we'll know where she is. And July 1st came, and there was no request from Social Security to get her check. And I said, there's something not very right here. So Sandy got a call into Ashley. I even got a call to Ashley. And I said, Ashley, she said, well, Trish comes. Now, this is in June, and we know now that Trish was murdered in May. So in June, she tells me, she said, well, she's supposed to come over here this weekend. And she says, I says, you tell her to call us. And she said, I'll tell her to call. And so I said, oh, then Friday comes, no call. Monday comes, I call Ashley and I said, did Trish come? She said, she came just for a few minutes, but she didn't stay very long. And I said, did you look out the window to see what kind of a car she came in so we could track down this car that maybe she's in? And she said, oh, I didn't think of doing that. And I'm thinking, oh my God. So then I told Sandy, I said, we need to file a missing person report. Ashley and Sandy spoke. The story was from Ashley. Trish does not want to have anything to do with the family. She said her grandmother, she doesn't want to go back to Florida because her grandmother makes her do all the work, and she has to do all the dishes, and she has to be the one to do all this work. And doesn't want to go back to Florida. So Sandy got off the phone with her, and she said, that does not sound right. So thankfully, she texted Ashley, and she said, you told me that Trish said she does not want to come back to Florida, and she doesn't want to have anything to do with the family. You tell her that she is to call me and tell me that herself, and then I'll leave her alone. Otherwise, I am filing a missing person report on Monday. And Ashley's words were, if you file a missing person report, I can guarantee you'll never see your granddaughter again. And Sandy said, you know what? I'm not waiting until Monday. So she called right away to the New Hampshire, I think she called Lincoln Police Department, Lincoln, New Hampshire, and told them she wanted to file a missing person report to report her granddaughter as missing. I want to back up a little bit. These people, Ashley and Douglas Smith, lived in this house, and they had like 4 kids. They moved in another couple whose names were Sarah and Travis. They moved into the house with their bunch of kids, and apparently Trish was made to take care of these kids and was made as kind of a slave. So Travis and Sarah had their children. Douglas and Ashley had their children, but Travis had a little girl. The little girl that I told you about before, she was 10 years old. She was there, and she got to see Trish, but she was only there weekends, so she was not there constantly. She lived with her mother. So when they put Trish's picture on the TV saying this girl is missing, she says to her mother, she says, I know where that girl is. She's at Ashley's house. And because of that little girl, his mother called the father. They were divorced. She called Travis, and she said, wants to go to the police and tell them that she knows where Trish is. And he said, no, don't let her do that. I'll go myself. So Travis went to the police and told them different things. And then it was him that led them to the washer and dryer in the pond. And they did all this big search. I mean, there were helicopters around the town of Grafton. There were people and police looking at all these different places that Ashley and Douglas had stayed in. There was a whole big thing. And then what about all this evidence? Why have they not followed up on this with all these people? There was Douglas and Ashley Smith that lived in the house. It's reported that Ashley was actually the one that murdered her. Douglas covered it up. And then he did not put that washer and dryer into the pond by himself. I'm sure Travis knows something about how that was done. Why don't they follow through on this? I'll tell you what, if they cannot solve this case in the state of New Hampshire, they will never solve one, because it's not like they're looking for a missing person. They found pieces of her in this washer and dryer dumped in that pond.
All right, we're going to take a quick break for commercial. And just a reminder, folks, that we will return at the end of this conversation with some final thoughts.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. So it was evidently Trish in the washer dryer in the pond.
I'll tell you what, there was only a piece of her jawbone there. And they apparently, there have been various stories and scenarios given to us that possibly could have happened, but let's just say it, a jawbone and teeth are the one thing that a pig cannot digest.
And this washer and dryer, was this a single unit?
It was a stackable.
Okay. And was there any ownership? Like, who owned it? Where did it come from?
I don't know if the investigators have found that out. Douglas was a junker. That's what he does for a living. He goes and picks up junk and sells it or scraps it or whatever. So that was whether or not it's a piece of thing that they dug up someplace else, whether it was in their house and they used it. Well, there was one girl that Ashley got to have her go over and clean out the basement of this house where they were living. And there was this freezer there. And she wanted this girl to clean out the freezer. And the girl did. She says, "Oh, my God." She said, "It looks like there's blood in here." And Ashley said, "Oh, yeah." She said, "The owner of the house used to kill deer, and it's probably blood from the deer meat." And so the girl continues to clean it out. And then she's, "Yeah, but there's some long hair in here, too." And Ashley just says, "Oh, that's probably my hair." She says, "I tried to clean it out, but I was sick to my stomach, so I couldn't do it. So it's probably mine." So nothing was said more about that until this girl finds out that Trish has disappeared. And then she says, "Oh, my God, what could this have been? Did they use that freezer?" And there was, a report. There was only a report that possibly Ashley made Trish stay in that freezer one day when they were going to be going away, and they would lock Trish into some spots where she couldn't get out while they were gone. And whether or not they put her in the freezer and were stupid enough not to realize that it would kill her by being locked in this freezer, came back, found her dead, and then they had to dispose of her body. So there are some scenarios, and they're only scenarios, but I'll tell you what, they know she's dead. They did find her jawbone in that washing machine. And the last people that knew about Trish were in that house. And somebody in that house told them where to find this washing machine. So don't you tell me that the state does not have enough evidence to be able to go and do something about this case.
Did they give you any indication as to how long the washer had been underwater?
No.
To back up a little bit, when Ashley had said that Trish had left with a new boyfriend, did she give a name or a description of the boyfriend?
No description of the car, no description at all, no names. As a matter of fact, there was one girl who lived in northern Vermont. Ashley called her and told her, if anybody's looking for Trish, just tell them that she's with you, that she came to visit you. And this girl came forward and said, that never happened, but she did tell the police that one time about this. This girl has been interviewed by the police. What have they done with that information? We had a lot of high hopes because they had somebody on the case by the name of Jeffrey Strelzin, who was, the DA or whoever worked in the DA's office that was handling this case. And his name was Strelzin. I think it was Jeffrey. He was useless. And so then he just didn't do anything that we ever asked him to. So finally, they got another Attorney General from the Attorney General's office. They've got another person on here now. His name is Ben Agati. I had a lot of hopes that he was going to really press this case and do something with it. Well, he hasn't done anything on it either. But we keep going before them every 3 months. Now that we have a new advocate, they give us a state's advocate. They kept giving us a series of advocates that we needed to contact if we wanted to ask questions or if we had anything to report. And all they ever said to us, there's nothing new to report. One lady didn't like it very much because after about the third time she told me that, I said, you know what? Why don't they just buy a good old tape recorder that can tell me that? I said, because you'd never have anything to tell us. Why don't they just get a tape recorder and save themselves your salary? And she didn't like that very much. But anyway, that's how I felt. So finally, we now have Shayna, who is now our advocate. And she goes into the state's attorney general's office with us on a 3 to 6 month period. And we just go in and ask them more questions and let them know that we're not going away. And so Shayna has been, she does a good job for us. And they didn't really want us to have a new advocate, but, somebody's got to fight for this. A lot of these cases that you never hear solved is because the families don't stand up and fight and bring it to the attention of people. So this Douglas and Ashley are in prison right now for other things. They are such criminals that they're in prison for other things. And Douglas almost got out last week. And we all put up a really big fuss. And then all of a sudden, the day that he was supposed to get out or the day before he was supposed to leave, they went and investigated the house, and it was full of drug dealers and drug people. And so he wasn't able to get out after all. And so that's the type of people these are. And then they put him in jail for a little short time, and then they let him out again. What good is that? If these people are that bad, keep them in there. She's on work release and working at a supermarket in Concord. So, but she has to go back to prison for the nights.
And was the house searched? The house was searched, right?
Oh, yeah. The house was searched. They had cops in there, and they did all this stuff. There was luminol. They said, one girl said that was in there, said, boy, the place lit up like a Christmas tree or something with luminol. What do they do with it?
And when the search happened, were Ashley and Doug, they weren't incarcerated for anything at that time, right?
They never have been incarcerated for anything to do with Trish. The house was searched. Yep. They got all this stuff out of there, and they, and all this evidence, and somebody had to tell them when they were doing this search, somebody had to tell them where this washing machine was, and they did find her jawbone in there. So she didn't do this to herself. That was the last place she was found. Why can they not do something to bring some kind of charges against these people? If Ashley's the one that caused her death by locking her in this freezer, why don't they get Douglas to, tell his part of it, Somebody is dropping the ball someplace.
So when they searched the house, Ashley and Doug were available if police wanted to take them for some questioning.
Absolutely, and apparently they did. And there's been word that they've had some kind of a grand jury thing someplace. We don't know that for sure, but so many people came forward. Now, we might not even known what was going on if I had not really dug into it. I had a girl come to my house who said I was going to rent part of my house out. She came to be interviewed as a possible tenant, and she told me that the name of her parents were Smith. And I said, oh my God, that name makes my skin crawl because of Doug. I said, you don't happen to know a Douglas and Ashley Smith, do you? And she said, not here in Boscawen, but I know one in Grafton. And I said, oh my God. Come to find out, she had a connection to these people, whether or not she was sent to my house to see if I knew anything or not. But she has come forward with information about these people. I mean, there have been car fires. Two of the people that came forward, her being one of them, she's the one that came to my house. And then her car and the name of this girl that cleaned out the freezer, both of their cars were torched the same night. And they both had information about this case. Both of their cars were set on fire the same night, and nothing's ever been done about it.
All right, we're going to take a quick break for commercial. And just a reminder, folks, that we will return at the end of this conversation with some final thoughts.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. Now, I understand they were hoping that the family would keep part of this kind of quiet for a period of time.
Yeah, I guess so. We found out in September is when they did this search. They found the pieces of Trish, and Sandy, the grandmother, came to New Hampshire and stayed with me, and they had told her about the jawbone in the wash machine. They had told her that parts of Trish was in that wash machine, but please do not divulge that. They did not want to mess up the investigation. Well, Sandy told me about it only because she was going to have to come to my house so that they could do a DNA test on her to find out if this jawbone that they found in this wash machine actually belonged to Trish. So Sandy was up there and came up to my house, and she had told me what was going on. As soon as we got there, the investigators, along with the advocate that they had given us, came to my house and asked us, they told Sandy certain things. And then Sandy said to them, look, I'm up here by myself. I'm the only one, supposedly, that knows that Trish is dead and that the jawbone that was in the wash machine is hers. But they did not want us to tell anybody. So we went from September, knowing what happened, until January. And she and I were not supposed to tell anybody anything. So I kept having people come and say, have you heard from Trish? Did they find Trish? No, what am I supposed to say? They keep us quiet, saying we're not supposed to say anything because it would mess up the investigation. Well, who wants to mess up any investigation if there's hope? So we didn't say anything. And so then, come January, Sandy was told that she could tell the immediate family, like her father, who was dying of cancer, that we could tell the immediate family that we knew Trish was dead. So that goes from September, when they found out for sure it was her, all the way for January. So then from January to May, we're not supposed to let on to anybody other than family. So when I got back home, I'd had enough of that. I said, they're not doing anything. And this being kept quiet, nobody's coming forward with information. I mean, if you put it out there that, we're searching for a murderer, some of these people that have found out that she's not around anymore might come through with some information. So finally, I went to WMUR News, and I says, I've got a follow-up on a case. You did a missing person thing on her back in July or August last year. Let me tell you what happened to Trish. So Amy Cavino came to my house, and she did the interview. And there, from that interview, I think that was on July 17th. So we have gone from September to January. They let us tell just the family. From January all the way until, I think it was July 17th is the date that kind of sticks in my mind, that Amy came and did an interview with me. And I says, well, they've got it as a missing person, but let me tell you, Trish is not missing. And so she went from my house, she went down to the Attorney General's office and says, I just had an interview with this family, and I'm going to do a story tonight. What have you got to say about it? And so they came through. My story was going to be on at 11. They came in at 7:30 on their 7:30 broadcast and admitted that the missing person case that they had talked about months ago was not a missing person case. It was investigation for a murder. So it was only because we pushed buttons and insisted on them telling that it was a murder and not a missing person. And it was almost a year. That's a real fallacy as far as I'm concerned. Why? They might have been able to solve this a little bit more readily. Maybe some of the evidence would not have been able to be disposed of if they hadn't been given a year.
So what does the office of the Attorney General say now when you go up there? Where are they with the investigation?
they just say it's not a cold case. You know what? By saying it's not a cold case, they don't have to give over the information that they have. So if they can continue on saying it's not a cold case until the cows come home, and they don't have to then give us over any of the discovery information just by saying it's not a cold case. So there are a few things that they have been working on supposedly, and some new eyes. A new investigator has been on looking at the case, and it gives us a little bit of hope, but not a lot.
Now, I know you mentioned Shayna from Light the Way, and that is a great organization that advocates for a lot of cases, specifically in the Northeast. So we just wanted to say we think you're in good hands with her and with Tate's there at Light the Way. They're fantastic people.
You had said that maybe if they hadn't waited so long, evidence wouldn't have been disposed of. And I was just curious, did you mean did the police dispose of evidence, or you were just saying the potential that the people who did this disposed of evidence?
The people who did this could have disposed of evidence or come up with different stories, and things get lost in the mind. I mean, things that I knew before, I said, oh yeah, that should have been brought up, or this person should have been brought up. I had people coming out of the woodwork telling me different stories about these people. And I would give the investigators their names, and there's so many that have come forward with information about these people, of actually seeing the abuse of Trish. And because these people, half of them have something to do with the drug trade, they didn't report it, or they didn't. One girl says, I asked Trish if she wanted me to take her out of there that night because she saw Douglas backhand her and knock her into a table. And Trish was afraid, or whatever, for whatever reason. And I want to make it very clear, too, that when she left here from Florida to go and stay with those people, Trish was not on drugs. Whether or not they gave her some, or if she got involved later on, I have no proof of that. But Trish was not into the drugs when she left 3 months before she was murdered.
How do you think things would be different, or do you think things would have been different at all if a missing persons report was filed sooner than it was?
Yes, I think if it had been filed sooner. There's also a possibility. See, I don't think she was murdered until May, around May 17th or something like that. If we had filed a missing person report a little sooner, they might have been able to get up there and go into that house and look for her while she was still alive. I don't know. I don't know that for sure. That's a question that will always be in the back of our minds, is it might possibly been able to, if we could have just gotten her out of there alive. Sometimes in the back of my mind, I worry about whether or not it's because Ashley found out that I had gotten back to New Hampshire, and that I might be coming around that way. And see, another thing is, neither Sandy nor I knew what Ashley's last name was. She knew her as Ashley Ruff, but we didn't know her married name, and we knew she had kids. And that should be something that everybody should, if you're going to go someplace, let the family know where you're going, where the name of the people you're going to be with. That, if I could tell anybody in the whole United States as to what to do, I don't care if they're your friend or not, let someone know where you're going, who you're going to be with, their names and their address. Because this is supposedly she was going with a friend. We didn't even know her last name at the time. You need to let somebody know, because you never know when this friend can turn into a foe, or things happen, and you just need to let people know where you are. This girl was just a terrible girl, and she never outgrew it from the time she was a child, and people were afraid of them. They didn't report things because these people were not nice people.
Well, Valerie, thank you so much for chatting with us today. We really appreciate it.
Well, you're more than welcome. Thank you for the interest in the case and helping to put the word out. And you never know who's going to listen to a podcast or some information and finally find it in their heart to come forward and give the information that be the one thing that could bring these people to answer for what they did.
And we'll, in the intro to this episode, we'll provide the information for anyone who has any information on what actually happened to Trish. But where do you typically direct people if they say they have something that they need to let authorities know?
To the New Hampshire State Attorney General's office.
Okay, we're back here for final thoughts after the interview with Valorie Haynes Alvarez. I cannot believe how kind of dark this story is, and just like the words evil, and unfathomably tragic, keep coming to mind here. I don't even know where to begin, Lance.
Yeah, I don't either. I will say that I always respect, and I'm so blown away every time we have somebody come on, a family member or a friend, anybody who is really close to the individual who's missing or murdered and there's still no justice, that when they come on and they're at that tipping point, and I feel like Valerie's at that tipping point where she's starting to, and not in a bad way, but her focus is so hyper-focused on the AG office and law enforcement. And it makes me feel kind of sad when I hear that, because it's gone beyond the individual and into the realm of they're not doing their job. And when we have a conversation with people, and it always goes back to, and if they just did their job, and here's another thing that they didn't do, and we've been talking to them for months and our advocate didn't care. When it always goes back to that conversation and the individual who we're speaking with is so focused on that, I mean, that just says something about the whole process itself. When you've started to lose track of the person who you're fighting for, and you're starting to be more focused on the institution that is put in place seemingly to help you. And it's so tragic.
So tragic. Yeah, I can't blame the family for being upset. There's so many points here where, you kind of expect something to happen. The first thing I want to mention here, and I'm going back to when Trish was alive and with a different boyfriend, I guess, in the beginning of this conversation, she was in an abusive relationship and I guess filed a police report about that abuse, and then was sort of talked out of following through. And actually she recanted that story because I guess this ex was going to go back to prison. So that's the first part that I'm very sad about, because, and in Valerie's words, she said the Woodstock police begged her not to recant because they would have to charge her with filing a false police report. I'm sure the police know that guy, was not a great guy. So that was probably part of it. I can't imagine they'd really want to charge her. Charge Trish with this. This is the victim here, the abuse victim that they're talking about charging her, because I guess filing a false police report is a crime. But if they know that she was actually an abuse victim and not intentionally committing this crime of filing a false police report, like, that's so infuriating that they're treating the victim that way.
I know, right? Like, instead of following up on the actual report and, I don't know, moving forward with some sort of, I don't want to say investigation, but questioning of the other boyfriend, instead of saying, listen, you can't do this. Like, I don't get it. You can't do this. It's going to be a false report if you do, which means, I guess that indicates that the police understood that the first report wasn't false. You know what I mean? If they're telling her you're going to be charged with filing a false report, they must on some level believe that isn't really false, And so yeah. I mean, it is infuriating. I don't know how the whole system works in that regard, but I do know that Valerie said that it was commonly known that she was abused. Was that in the same context of this current boyfriend when she said it was commonly known?
I'm not sure. I don't remember that part specifically, but I do know that Trish was on disability for PTSD from abuse in her past as well. So I'm not sure what part she was talking about, I guess, when she said that.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. And I just wrote it down. I meant to follow up with her. She said it right in the beginning. And I think it just might have been, just the series of abuses that Trish had suffered. And it was, that was commonly known. But it is a failure on some level of law enforcement to not follow up on it and just lean on you're going to be charged with filing a false report. I don't know. I guess that's another question. If they actually did on some level question that boyfriend.
Yeah, I don't know. We didn't really get any information about that part. But so Trish spent her time between New Hampshire and Florida. And per Valerie, that was why she was in New Hampshire, was waiting around for that court case, waiting around a few months for that court case to come around. So Trish should, could appear and I guess defend herself. But she never showed up. That court date came and went. And that's when Trish's family started realizing that something, could be really wrong here.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it just took so long. And the family didn't immediately think anything was particularly strange as far as not hearing from Trish, which is really unfortunate because, we do hear about this. We hear about it on both sides. We hear, the person disappears, and then the family goes to the police, the next day, soon thereafter, and nothing happens still. The person's still not found. So there's that really, really tight window where the report is filed and something happens in the investigation and there's resolution, Yeah. We've seen it with private investigations for the missing, too. They've been cases that have been solved and people have been located, and we don't really talk about those because usually the people choose to be missing, or it's just a circumstance with families that we're not going to put out there to the public. But it does happen, but it's also very common where I think family members don't want to come to terms with this reality that their loved one might be missing. So,
well, it's hard to believe what Trish actually went through in this case.
It's still hard. Yeah, absolutely.
I don't blame her family for I guess, not filing the report earlier, because what ended up happening to her is so dark and, like you said, monstrous. Who would assume that was going to happen?
No one's head goes there right away.
No, and I don't think anything would have been any different either.
No,
had they done it because of basically the threat that the family got, saying that if you file this report, you'll never see her again.
That's crazy. It's crazy. But if you do file the report, you'll still never see her again. And if you don't file the report, you'll still never see her again.
Right. So at that part of the story, she was probably, I don't know, I know Valerie has an idea of when I think she believes Trish was murdered. I don't know if this moment happened before or after that, but I can't imagine it would have ended any differently.
I know.
After she said that.
Once the wheels are in motion, once those types of people start that type of behavior, and what are they going to stop doing? Are they going to come to some sort of grips with reality and stop doing this torture and abuse? No, if anything, they escalate it.
Right. And we didn't talk about this specifically, but I do wonder how Trish's disability checks were being used during the period of time where she was living with Ashley and Doug, because of the reaction that Ashley gave when they said they're going to file a police report. I have to wonder how much they were counting on Trish and that disability check,
Pretty convenient, right? So this, I guess, high school bully that Trish knew in school.
At grade school, I believe.
Grade school, right. So I just paused there because I realized it wasn't high school. It was earlier than that. But this person who she remembered as being, a bully, or I don't know. So these two individuals, Doug and Ashley, are given this opportunity, this dark opportunity to have somebody who was once in their life, who Ashley had allegedly bullied. All of a sudden, she appears out of the blue again and is like, "Oh, hey, I'm going to be in the area," and she's looking for a place to stay. they find out she's on disability. She's getting these checks. So yeah, we're gonna keep her here. We're gonna tell her these checks are ours. We're giving you a place to stay, so consider it rent payment. And you also have to do this and this and this. And they're obviously not well individuals. They're career criminals. And clearly Trish didn't know this going into it. And before she knew it, it was too late to get out of it.
Yeah. That's pretty much the read on it that I have as well.
Seriously. And she was so young too.
Yeah. And such a sort of dark way to find out that she's no longer missing, but in fact was murdered. Finding her jaw in the washer dryer unit in Grant's Pond. That is crazy. So I do want to say that I'm sure the process of prosecuting a case like this is a little bit different than like a straight up homicide, right? Because I think you kind of have to probably prove that she was murdered before you can move to that stage of the investigation, right? So I do want to, mention that it can't be an easy case to prosecute. But the New Hampshire Attorney General's office asked the Haynes family not to even mention that part of her was found in the pond. So that's weird, right? Like, I've never heard of that happening. Not to say it doesn't happen or hasn't happened, but never heard of the police asking the family to hold like something like that back, where like there's missing flyers out about Trish. They're probably still getting tips about her being missing, since that was so short after she went missing anyway. And so a whole year went by where they knew that she likely wasn't missing at all. But they asked the family. And then when the family had enough of that period of time where they felt like the Attorney General's office probably wasn't doing enough to move the case toward prosecution, they decided to sort of blow the whistle on this and say, no, she's not a missing person at all. She was a murder victim. They asked a reporter to interview them, and the reporter did, and then asked the Attorney General's office for comment. And then the Attorney General's office then makes the announcement that, oh yeah, she's not missing, before the family interview airs on the news that night.
Yeah, so slippery of them.
I mean, it's not like they're not doing anything, and I'm sure the family moving into that phase of, not wanting to call Trish missing threw them for a loop. But it's clear that they can do something spontaneously, like put together a press statement and announce that she was found, but like not keep in contact with these family members better. That's very frustrating, I will say. And that extends a little bit further than the Haynes family in this case, because it's not like an isolated incident. Like there's a whole coalition
right
about this specific issue. Yeah,
they feel the need to form a coalition and march on the AG office in New Hampshire constantly and have victim advocates meet with them constantly, because it's such an issue and because they have to handhold the people who are responsible for an investigation. And to get back to them preemptively coming out and saying this is a murder investigation, which they never would have done if the family hadn't gone forward with a reporter. They never would have done that in that time frame. Just, again, speaks to how callous they are. There's no reason why they couldn't have huddled up and said, okay, let's get ahead of this, but let's invite the family to be part of this. Let's have a joint press release with the family, in connection with the family, and at least show that there's some unity here. But they couldn't even do that. Like when Valerie was talking about that, I was thinking about saying just that. Like, well, they could have at least made it look like it was in collaboration with the family. But they couldn't have done that because all of the events leading up to that led the family to do what they did with the reporter. You know what I mean? Like the family would never have agreed to it because they were beyond that point anyway. So they couldn't backtrack and say, this is in collaboration with the family, because it was well beyond that we're working together point. So that just goes into being even more like I don't know, gross about the whole thing. Everything that they didn't do with the family, and I'm not saying they have to disclose every piece of information, but you work with the family and you say, listen, there's stuff that we just can't tell you, but know that we're working on it, and be proactive with the family. Don't respond to them, reach out to them and tell them, hey, it's been a couple of weeks. There hasn't really been anything. Just want to keep you guys informed that there's no progress right now, but we're still working on it. There's no reason why you can't do that. And had they done that, the family wouldn't have had to go to the press and say what they said, and then there wouldn't have been this whole thing. So it's just a whole gross situation that they get themselves into every single time. They don't learn.
Yeah, and I want to say that we're constantly rooting for law enforcement and the Attorney General's offices across the country. We're rooting for cases to be prosecuted, and certainly these New Hampshire cases are no different. So it's not like we've got like a personal bias, but it's just a very frustrating situation. So and we know New Hampshire, some law enforcement will listen from time to time, and I don't know. I just want to say we're rooting for them to make this happen.
We don't like talking about it like this.
Yeah.
It'd be great to talk about it in the other way.
Right.
Yet another frustrating one, but we'll definitely have as many people on who are connected with Trish's murder, and if Valerie has more information that she wants to come on and talk about, she's more than welcome. Anybody's more than welcome. And if you're a podcaster out there and you do true crime, or you do something adjacent to true crime, and you want to help spread the word, reach out to Valerie. Like, get her. She'll go on any show and talk about this. The more eyeballs and ears that are on this, the better.
All right, and just want to mention that this coalition is called the New Hampshire Coalition of Families of the Missing and Murdered, and they've been very active visiting the State House the past 2 summers. I believe it's in August, happened in 2023 and again in 2024. So hopefully this helps lead to change. We're certainly here to support the families of these victims. I really do hope some movement happens from the Attorney General's office.
And just one more quick thing on that. I think it's amazing that people have come together for this coalition. Julie Murray has really led the charge on this, and the Murray family, because of Maura's disappearance. But again, as motivated as I am when I hear about things like that and how inspiring that coalition is, it's still so tragic that it even has to be put in place in the first place. And like you said, we would love something to happen here. We would love some sort of justice, I guess you could say. And maybe the law enforcement, maybe the AG has that piece of evidence. They're just waiting to make a connection. I don't know. But in the meantime, we think about the family, and we hope everybody out there can, in their own way, support them.
Okay, everybody, thanks a lot for listening. We really appreciate it, and we will do our best to continue coverage on this case.